and welcome to another episode of the Tealand Knits knitting podcast. My name's Natasha. I'm originally from the UK, but I am currently living on a tropical island called Sri Lanka with my husband Bob. So today I am just drinking another glass of water, just some water today. I do like to drink it out of my Kilner jar. It is, I don't think that I'll be able to get this to focus because it's focusing through water. But they're like canning jars that you can get in the UK. And I got the wide mouth one, and we originally got it to ferment kefir, the probiotic drink kefir, because we are really into having good gut health. But I found that it was too small because we were making a litre at the time, and this jar was 500 millilitres. And I thought it would actually be a perfect water glass. So I have carted it round with me everywhere. And it is currently now with us in Sri Lanka, and I'm very happy using it. It helps me to keep on top of my hydration, which you really need to be careful about here. So that's what I'm drinking. And I did want to tell you about my current work in progress. So this work in progress has been, I must admit, on the needles for quite a long time, because I sometimes just get distracted and I want to cast something else on, and then I forget about the previous project and then come back to it, I don't know, a year later sometimes, and finish it and then love it. And I think that a lot of us knitters are like that, so I do feel bad, but not alone. So this is a pair of socks that I'm knitting at the moment, and they have a special story. So when we go on holiday anywhere that has a knitting tradition or that sells yarn, I love to buy a ball of yarn from that area and knit something, a little project that will remind me of that trip. And this one was very special because Cornwall has a very long knitting tradition, historically. So it's not just for warmth, but they also knit for practicality. So Guernseys or Ganseys are a traditional garment that was worn by fishermen around the UK. And it was originally knit in, I think, 5-ply yarn, and it was knit on smaller needles so that it produced a very thick fabric. And that fabric would then keep out the cold and those very, very harsh conditions and that harsh environment of being on the sea. So they were very practical for that. But they also had something very special about them. In Cornwall, along the coastline, each town, or each village rather, had its own pattern that would be knit into the Gansey, and that pattern would identify the area from which that fisherman came. It was for practical reasons. If there was a fishing disaster, they would be able to identify the fisherman more easily. But it was also something like a lovely tradition that they had, where they were able to tell exactly where someone was from the pattern on their Gansey, on their jumper. So when we were in Cornwall, I wanted to knit something that was specific to the area that we'd been staying in. And we were staying near Polperro in Cornwall. And I went to a shop called The Hive, which is in Pellint. Really sorry about my pronunciation if I'm not pronouncing it properly. So that shop is very close to Polperro, and the owner of the shop, Rachel, she is also known as Demelza's Delights. She dyes her own hand-dyed yarn and sells it in her shop as well as online. And I actually found out about her shop on Ravelry, because I went onto Ravelry and I did a search for Cornwall because I wanted to knit something specifically from Cornwall to remember the trip by, and I found her socks. She's designed a pair of socks on Ravelry. They are called the Polperro Knit Frock socks, and what they are is a combination of several different knitting patterns from the Ganseys in the areas in and around Polperro. I thought they were so special because now I could knit myself a souvenir from the specific area that we visited in Cornwall, and it helps me remember that holiday so much better. So these are the socks so far. They're knit top down. So I started with the cuff. And I've knit down, and I'm currently on the foot now. I've done the heel. And I don't think I've made any changes to these socks because sometimes I find that they're a little bit short, and so I'll add a little bit more on the top section. Maybe I'll add a slightly longer cuff, or I will throw in another repeat, pattern repeat, and I'll add some length. But I think these are actually the sort of length that I like. I will do an episode, I think, on socks in future, because I have certain tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way, because I like to research things heavily, and so I have very easy little tips that you can use to determine the length of your socks, and also to keep your place on your socks as you're knitting them. But anyway, back to these socks. I really like them. I really like the pattern on them. I love the ease of the pattern because it's just knit purl. So they're all knit purl designs, and what I love about knitting is that you can't really tell what something is going to look like as you're doing each individual stitch. And then you get to a point where you sit back and look at your work and think, wow, that looks amazing. And you really feel that sense of accomplishment. So I love these socks because each section is different. So you're not feeling like this is very repetitive. And I don't think it has any repeats. I would have to check in the pattern itself. It might possibly have one repeat, so it may repeat the leg on the foot, but I would need to check that. But what it means is that it makes for a very nice, interesting knit, because you're not constantly repeating the same thing over and over again. So last week, actually, I think I've given myself an idea. Last week I did mention that I like to have 2 projects on the needles. I like to have something that's quite simple, stockinette, that I can do as a mindless knit, and then I like to have something that's either got a pattern or some colour work in it. And this is perfect. This is a perfect project because it does have all this colour work. It does have all of this patterning in it. So there is a chart, there are several charts which I will work, so I have to look at those. But it's something that's nice to do if you fancy a bit of variation on the classic and sort of repetitive stockinette stitch. The yarn that I bought from the shop, so the shop, I don't know, did I mention the shop? Yes, I did, the Hive in Pellant. The yarn that I bought is this gorgeous yarn. Isn't it so pretty? It's just got so many very slight variations in it to make it interesting and beautiful without making it too, busy. So this yarn is from the brand Schoppel Wolle, or Schoppel Wool, and it's in the colourway Turmeric. And when I've looked on the Hive Pellant website, which is thehivepellant.co.uk, if you are interested in having a look at the yarn that Rachel sells. This particular wool is called, I think the product line is called the Schoppel Admiral Hanf. So this is, I'm looking at the notes for the product here. So this is a new line from Schoppel Wool. It's sock wool with hemp, and it's sold in a 100-gram ball. And usually for socks, I will use a 100-gram ball, and I will get a full pair of socks out of them. I don't have very big feet, So that may be why, if you have larger feet, you may need a little bit more. Or if you do, so you can see that the cuff on this sock is just the same yarn, the same colour. So I've just gone with like a one colour sock. But sometimes you can, if you want to, you can add a contrasting cuff, you can add a contrasting heel, and you can add a contrasting toe, and that will reduce the amount of yarn that you use in one colour. So something that a lot of knitters like to do with the sock yarn in their stash is to use it to make contrasting cuffs, heels and toes on their socks. And that will help you to use up the yarn that you've got in your stash, but it also helps if you're not sure whether you've got enough of your main colour. By breaking up the sock with different contrasting colours, it makes sure that you have enough wool, basically. But anyway, I knew that I would be able to get a full pair of socks out of this 100-gram ball. So yes, I'll just tell you a little bit about this yarn because I just think it's beautiful. And it's been interesting. It says this is the first long-lasting sock yarn to be made with environmentally friendly biodegradable nylon. It has hemp in it. The fibre content is 67% new wool, 23% nylon and 10% hemp. The ball size is 100 grams and it recommends knitting on the needles size 2 to 3 millimetre needles. I think my needles are 2.5 millimetre needles, or also the US size is 1.5 millimetre, and I just find that for me that size is the size I like to use for the density of fabric that I like. So that is my current work in progress, and I will show you, because I do have more socks that I'm working on, so I'll show you those another time. I am also planning in future to make a go-to sock pattern. I do have a few patterns that I'd like to knit over and over again, but I haven't yet found a go-to sock pattern in a very simple stitch pattern that I can just have on the needles all the time, not have to think, and just do them over and over again in different colours. So I'm planning on designing something like that myself, which that's still in the works. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at my notes now because I've got a couple of topics that I wanted to discuss here on the podcast today. So as I mentioned last week, something that is very dear to my heart is knitting on a budget. So when I started out knitting, I wanted to knit all the time, and if you've had a look at yarn that is made in natural fibres, you will know that it can get very, very expensive. So I like using natural fibres personally because of their properties. So wool has some very impressive qualities. It is antibacterial and antimicrobial. That means that when you wear it, it is resistant to mold and mildew, and it is also what is considered as self-cleaning. So you don't need to wash it as often. As long as after you've worn the garment, if you need to, you can give it a little air. But a lot of knitters will only wash their garment sort of each season. Before the next season, they'll do a batch of knitwear washing, drying, and then put it away in a sealed container until the next season when they will wear them. That way it will keep them free of things like moths and other insects that are attracted to the yarn and to us humans. So putting them in an airtight sealed container is important for that. But you just don't need to wash it as much. Socks obviously are a little different because socks have that contact with the ground, so they are going to get a little marked on the bottom. But a lot of knitters will wear socks until they do start to get a little marked on the bottom, and then they will wash them. They don't wash them after every wear. You don't need to wash your socks after every wear. They don't smell. And wool is also like oil resistant. It's stain resistant. So when you'll find that if you spill a little bit of something on yourself when you're eating, usually it will bead up and roll off because it's kind of water resistant as well. It's considered that kind of fabric. Just obviously it's not waterproof, but if you do spill something on yourself, it will bead up and roll off, and it's easier to clean up. And it is also, of course, very warm. It has excellent insulation properties. People even use wool when they're building houses to insulate the walls. Obviously they're not going to use yarn, but sheep's wool is very, very warm. That is why the sheep can survive so well in the harsh British winters, which are very cold, and Icelandic sheep have incredibly warm wool, and Icelandic wool is known for being extremely hardy and warm. So I really do like natural fibres personally, but natural fibres can be really expensive. For a 50-gram ball of yarn, you could be looking at anything from, I don't know, £10 to 15, 20, maybe more than that, pounds for 50 grams. Now when you think that usually a jumper will take, if you're knitting in DK weight yarn, a jumper could take something like, for the average person, 300 to 500 or more grams of yarn. That can get extremely expensive if you think that one ball of 50 grams is 10 to 15 pounds. Of course, that is on the higher end, the sort of luxury end of the scale, and that is knitting in a thicker yarn. So DK is sort of a very standard. The two standard yarn weights, I would say, are 4-ply, which is a thinner yarn weight, and then DK, which is a thicker yarn weight, but the sort of two standard ones. Then you can go for worsted or Aran weight, which a lot of people use, and then after that you're sort of going towards the bulky weight yarn, which a lot of people will use because it's very quick to knit with, relatively speaking. If you're knitting on very small needles with 4-ply yarn, it's obviously going to take you a long time to knit the same circumference as if you're going to be knitting with a thicker yarn on larger needles. It will take far fewer stitches and so far less time to knit the same circumference. But I'm going to just look at my notes again. So these are the tips that I have. So the first thing I would suggest would be to look for lines of yarn that have a good amount of yarn for the price. So for example, you'll see that a lot of yarn skeins or balls will come in 100 grams, 100 gram weights, but some will also come in 50 gram weights, and you will also find some in 25 gram weights. Now, of course, if you see something that is a ball of yarn for £3, that could seem like a really good deal. Sorry, I'm working with UK pounds and pence here. I think £3 in dollars would be something like $4.50 maybe. I'm not sure, sorry. But yes, if you get something that's, say, £3 for a ball, but it's actually only 25 grams, that means that for 100 grams you're looking at £12, which then still isn't too bad. But you have to think, if you're spending £12 on 100 grams, and then say you're knitting on a project that's going to take 300, 350, 400 grams of yarn, then obviously it's going to make the cost go up quite significantly by the end of that project. So the yarn, I'll tell you the brands that I like to use for this in terms of the amount of yarn you get for the price point. It's Drops yarn. So Drops, it seems that all of their yarn really is good quality but at a good price point, especially for people who are knitting on a budget, or maybe you're just starting out with your knitting, you want to feel what the properties of natural fibres are like before you invest more heavily in those properties. Maybe you want to see whether you have any sensitivities, maybe you're allergic or sensitive rather to wool, but maybe you'd be okay with alpaca, or maybe alpaca fibres would be something more sensitive on your skin, and so you want to just check with a smaller project or a cheaper yarn before you invest more heavily in that. So I'll just show you the yarns I often use. I use Drops Flora. So Drops Flora, at the moment, currently, I buy, I would say 90% of my yarn from a shop in the UK called Wool Warehouse, and they do ship internationally as well. I will put their name just here. So Drops Flora at present is £2.40 per 50 grams. Its fibre content is 65% wool and 35% alpaca. It has no nylon in it. It is a 4-ply yarn and it is quite fine. I think it's excellent if you're looking for a slightly larger gauge. So if you want to knit on slightly larger than normal needles, for a more open gauge, this yarn is very good for the warmth factor still being there. It's also very good, in my opinion, for colour work because it's a little finer than some of the other 4-ply yarns I've seen, which means that when you combine it with 2 or 3 colours, the weight of the fabric is going to be lower, and also the density of the fabric is going to be lower than if this was a little bit thicker. So this is Drops Flora. Drops Nord I have spoken about before. So the Drops Nord yarn is also 50 grams. It is £2.70 at the moment on the Wool Warehouse website, and it is 4-ply. It's 45% alpaca, 25% wool and 30% polyamide. So it's very soft, it's very warm, and it's quite durable as well. So I like to use this for jumpers. So the Cornish tee was knit in this, but I also like to use it for socks because of the durability in the sock, in the yarn. It adds to the sock durability and how long lasting your socks will be. It's also very soft. So yeah, so that's what I recommend for the 4-ply yarns. This is what I use often, and I'll just show you, for example, this is the soft tweed yarn, Drop Soft Tweed. Again, I have used this before. I have spoken about this before on a previous podcast. It is 50 grams again. It's 50% wool, 25% alpaca and 25% viscose. So this again is a very warm yarn. It's in a DK weight, but in my opinion, while this is DK, I feel that it is quite, it's like a slightly heavier DK. I don't really know if, I mean that's how sort of thick the yarn is, like one strand of yarn. It's difficult because I don't have anything to compare it to in a DK at the moment, but in my experience this is just slightly on the heavier side of DK. That means that the garment will have a slightly thicker density or higher density if you're using needles suggested in a pattern, for example. So you may need to change your gauge to change your needles to fit the right gauge if they're using like a lighter DK. I love this yarn. I think it's really nice to knit with. It's very warm. The colorways that they offer are great. But that's the case with a lot of the drops yarn really. I like all of it. I have got some that I've ordered that I'm waiting to arrive, so I will share more later. And I do want to just mention that I'm not being sponsored or anything by Drops. I just really love their yarn, and I think that for the price point they are very economical. And so if you want to get into knitting with natural fibres, they are a great place to start. Something I should also quickly mention is that Drops has sales every year on specific product lines. So for example, they will have a sale on maybe for their alpaca products. So anything that contains alpaca will be discounted in that particular sale. Wool Warehouse will always have the sale on when it's time for the drop sale. So another tip is to wait until, so have a look at the yarn that you really want, and then wait until that yarn is on sale before you purchase it, and then do a large order during the sale period, so that you can get all of your yarn for a lower price. So if you are buying, for example, a jumper quantity or sweater quantity of yarn, then it will be much cheaper if you get it on sale, obviously. Obviously, if you're just knitting, you just need enough of a product to knit, for example, a hat or a pair of socks, then maybe buying it when it's not on sale is fine, because it's quite a low price point anyway. But if you are happy to wait, you've got the time to wait, and sometimes just waiting until it's on sale so that you can buy the entire quantity at the sale price is really good. Another brand that I do like and that I've used for socks is West Yorkshire Spinners. It's a British company based in Yorkshire in the UK. You will have heard me speak about Yorkshire before. They also have a very old long-standing knitting tradition, and I have bought yarn from yarn shops in Yorkshire before as well. So I did actually buy a ball of West Yorkshire Spinners yarn for some socks that I intend to make. Wool Warehouse also stocks West Yorkshire Spinners. It's also abbreviated as WYS. It's a very popular yarn in the UK, and they vary, so their yarns vary in price. But for example, the West Yorkshire Spinners Colour Lab DK, the DK weight, is 100% wool, and for 100 grams you're getting it for £6.49. So that is quite a competitive price. There are other yarns that they do. So for example, if you got, let's see, they've got the West Yorkshire Spinners Fleece Jacobs DK, which is another kind of sheep Jacobs yarn. It's 100% wool, 100 grams for £6.99. So there are options there. They also do some really lovely, very high quality yarns. For example, they've got a, I'm just having a look for the DK for the comparison, but I can't find it right now. So I'll just tell you the price for the Exquisite. So they've got a yarn called West Yorkshire Spinners Exquisite 4-ply, and that is 100 grams, and it is 80% wool and 20% silk. So you can just imagine the drape on that is going to be wonderful. When you're talking about yarn drape, it's like how drapey the fabric is when you wear it. I suppose as opposed to how much structure it's got when it sits on your body. So this is quite flowy. Obviously that also depends on the gauge at which you're knitting it, but this is £17.99 for 100 grams of 4-ply yarn. And that actually nicely takes me into my next tip, which is to knit in 4-ply. If you want to spend less on yarn and you're happy to take longer to knit that particular project, then if you knit in 4-ply yarn, you will naturally use less yarn for that project, and it will take you longer. So that's really, I think the only downside for some people is that it will take longer. I personally don't mind because I love knitting. They often say that knitters are divided into two camps. You're either a project knitter or product knitter, or a process knitter. And I was just trying to tell my husband that there were two different types of knitter. Before I'd even finished, he said, oh yes, you're definitely a process knitter, because I just love to knit anything all the time. As long as I've got some knitting in front of me, I'm happy. So I don't mind how long it takes. I don't mind if I have to unravel a whole garment to knit it again, because I made obviously a big mistake, but I don't mind unraveling a section of it if I made a small mistake. Whereas I know for some that would just be so difficult to cope with, and they would just keep knitting even though there were mistakes in it, because they wanted to finish that particular product or project. So anyway, if you're a knitter who doesn't mind waiting a little longer, if you enjoy the process of knitting, then I would recommend knitting in 4-ply yarn. 4-ply yarn is, you can get very high quality yarn for a lower price, and it's lower relatively speaking, because you are using less or fewer balls of yarn to knit the same garment. It will just be thinner, so you will end up with a finer garment, more akin to something that you would buy from a shop usually, like those fine, if you think about the fine sorts of wool or even cashmere jumpers where they're very fine, it's not going to be as fine as that, but it will be a fine jumper compared to something that's more hardy and warm, thick and warm rather. So something in a more bulky weight, or like a traditional DK weight. So yeah, so knitting in 4-ply is another good idea. A way to find out how much yarn you will need for a project is to go on Ravelry to look at the yarn weight. So filter by yarn weight, and then you'll be able to see the different garments or jumpers that are made in 4-ply yarn, and then they will often, they'll give you an estimate of how much yarn you'll need for your size. So then you can very easily work out roughly how much project is going to cost you. You can use that same filter for DK weight yarn, Aran weight yarn, worsted weight, etc. It's just it's a really handy filter to have on Ravelry. Now, another one that I have done in the past, and I must admit I haven't knit anything with it yet because it was really special yarn and I'm waiting to find the perfect project for it, is to unravel old garments and use that yarn. There is a whole, world of unraveling information on the internet. Google it, that's where I started looking into it. But if you think about very, very high quality garments that you can buy from the shop, from the high street, unfortunately, with the kind of society we live in, people are into fast fashion, and it's also a very wasteful society. It just is. It's how we live. But people will often get rid of garments that have had very little wear, or whose yarn, the yarn that's been used in that garment, even though it has got maybe some flaws, maybe it's got a hole in the garment, the yarn itself, the quality of that garment is still there. So what I've done is I've gone into charity shops, we call them in the UK, I think you call them thrift stores in the US. I've gone into charity shops and I've had a look at woolen knitted garments. Garments that you get from a high street shop are often the ones that you'll find in a charity shop. You don't often find hand knit garments, but you might sometimes. I have found a really wonderful Irish hand knit jumper that was in cable knit, that was bought from a shop by somebody a long time ago. It still had the it still had the label in it. So I was able to just Google that and find out what that yarn or what that company was, and also find out the composition of that yarn, and it was 100% wool. Now, unfortunately, that particular garment, which will happen sometimes, that particular garment, I couldn't unravel it properly because it was so old that the yarn was quite brittle in it, and so it would often break and tangle. So that was a very difficult one. But I did once find on eBay, I think, I found a wonderful Ralph Lauren wool and cashmere mix dress that was knit in cable. It was a size that was way too small for me to wear if I was wearing it as a dress, but because it was a cable knit dress, so cables use more yarn than a standard stockinette stitch, and also it was quite a tight gauge, and it was a dress, so it was much longer. I decided to buy that, unravel it, and then I could make it into a jumper or a cardigan or another garment that I would wear. Maybe it would have a slightly more cropped body or something like that. And I do actually have, I have plans to use it, I think, as a cardigan. So we'll see. It's a beautiful rustic colour. It's 2 yarn strands that I found that were held together. And I think it was machine knit. However, the way that it was knit on the machine was such that I was able to unravel the entire garment like in sections. There is a lot more information on unraveling garments online. There are certain ways that you can do it. There are certain things you need to look for in a garment before you can work out whether it's easy to unravel or whether it will be impossible or a headache. But you can find all that information online. If you would like to find out more about that, let me know and I can do another podcast episode on that in the future. But yes, unraveling finds like that from the thrift store or the charity shop, there is a thrill that you get from knowing that you have just bought an entire jumper quantity of yarn for, I don't know, £5, and that would have cost you like £50, £100 because of the quality of the yarn and the price that brand would have sold it at. I just love it personally. I don't always have the time to do it. I think that it's an excellent thing to do if you've got any sort of time, or if you have relaxed periods where you're able to just unravel. It does take some time to do that, but that is another thing that I really recommend if you can, even doing it just once, just to see the rewards that you get from just unraveling a product like that. It is really nice. And I think what's so nice is knowing as well that you're reusing something that has already been made, and making it into something that is going to last you as a knitter for a long time, because as we know, we will keep and reuse our knits for decades, or that's the intention anyway, or we will give them away as gifts and or pass them on to family members or children. So knowing that you're able to salvage something and reuse it and make it into something that is potentially an heirloom for your family, that's really special, I think. And then the other thing is very simple, is to tell people that you knit, and also that if they ask you whether you would like a gift, and to let them know what you like, is to tell them that you would love yarn, and be specific about the kind of yarn that you would like as well, if that's possible. If you tell people that you knit, oftentimes you will find good company. You'll find people that knit as well, and also who will have lots of yarn in their stash that they don't know what to do with, or that they want to get rid of, that you might absolutely love. So I've had this very kind and generous friends, when they found out that I do knit, they have gifted me yarn because they just weren't going to use it, but they wanted me to make it into something nice for myself or as a gift for someone else. So that is a really nice thing about the knitting community. People are very generous, and people love to see things that they've bought being turned into something that is going to be loved, even if it's not for them. I really do love that about knitting and other fibre arts. So that is another thing that I would recommend, really, is to just tell people that you like to knit. I often knit when I'm out and about. I've knit at hospital before when family members have been in and we've been visiting or whatever. And other people who've been there visiting have often asked me what I'm knitting, and we've just had a lovely conversation just based on knitting. So tell people that you knit. And if people want to buy you a gift and ask you what you would like, then do be specific. Tell them that you like yarn, tell them the kind of yarn that you like if that's possible, and then you'll all be happy because they'll buy you something that you really want, and you'll get something that is going to last, that's going to provide you with hours and hours and hours of entertainment, your favourite hobby maybe, and you'll end up with a beautiful garment or finished project at the end of it. So those are my tips for more economical knitting and how you can knit on a budget. If you can think of any more, please do mention those in the comments. I would love to hear your ideas, and I'd love to be able to take some of them myself and use them. So please do let me know in the comments. And also, just while I'm here, if there's anything else that you would be interested in me talking about on the podcast, please do let me know in the comments or get in touch. I am very open to hearing your ideas for more content on the channel, and if there's anything that you want to know more about or that you'd like me to discuss, I would be very happy to look into that. So yeah, please let me know. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about with knitting is a tip. So I was just on Instagram and I was looking at my cousin's Instagram stories for the day. I'm going to put her handle here. Her name is Joanna. Hello, Joanna. So she was just mentioning that she has finished knitting her blanket. She had a really beautiful multicolour blanket, striped multicolour blanket that she was working on, and she had got to her last row and she was casting off. And she mentioned that she has yarn ends that she needs to sew in. And yarn ends are what happens when you are joining, when you finish one ball of yarn, and you need to attach another ball of yarn to the end. So you need to attach one end of yarn to a new ball. There are different ways to do this. I use a method that is called spit splicing. Yes, it does involve what it sounds like. It involves water, so let's say that. Many people do spit on the yarn just to dampen it. I use water personally, usually. But it's a method in which you, if a yarn is at least 50% wool, I think, you can do it, it will work. I think it's 50%. But anyway, there's like, you do something to the yarn to both ends, and then you will put some water on your hands and you'll rub them together, and basically what it's doing is it's felting the yarn. You're intentionally felting it. We know, or most people know, that if you put a knitted garment in the washing machine, it will shrink and it will go all fluffy and furry or felted. And that is undesirable because we want our yarn to stay the right size. We don't want it to shrink and we don't want it to felt. We want to see all of that lovely detail work on our garment. But when you splice two ends of yarn together like that, that is intentional felting, and you are left with a very strong piece of continuous yarn. And you won't usually see where those two balls are joined in your work. Because you have just created a continuous thread, a continuous bit of yarn there. So that's how I personally will join balls of yarn together if they're in the same colour. But sometimes you're knitting in colour work or you're joining a new colour to your work, and so you can't, well, you can split splice, but it will look a bit messy maybe, because the colours won't meet exactly where they should. So what I do in that instance is a technique called weaving in as you go. And the way to weave in as you go is basically to knit as you would in colour work. So when you knit colour work, you knit with two colours on the same line, I think on the same row. That is called, well, traditional Fair Isle knitting is like that. You're working two colours at a time, no more than two colours at a time on one row, but you can have in there quite a few colours, as long as you're only using two of those colours on a row. That is Fair Isle, and it's also much easier to knit because you're only holding those two. But usually what many knitters do, because there are many different ways to knit colour work, but what I do is I'll knit using both my hands. So I'll hold one colour in this hand, my non-dominant hand, and I'll hold one colour in my dominant knitting hand. And what you have to do each time you switch colours is you catch the floats, or you trap one colour underneath the other colour, the other colour, so that at the back of your work you don't have really long pieces of yarn that when you put it on will get caught in your jewellery or get caught in your hand as you're putting the jumper on. That's called catching floats. And so weaving in ends as you go is the same kind of idea, where you're knitting with your main colour, but the end of your yarn you are trapping behind the work as you go. And if you trap it like that, it's basically knitting it into your work, into the back of your work as you go. So from the front you won't see anything, you won't see where you've woven in those ends, but from the back you will see it, as you would with any yarn that you're weaving in. But for me it has been a game changer, because it just means at the end of the project I have far fewer ends to weave in. And if you're knitting something like a blanket, you've only really got two. You've got your cast on end and your bind off edge that you need to weave in, and that's it. So I recommend it. I don't have a tutorial video on it. I still need to work out how to do tutorials, but I do recommend just Googling that term. I will put it here on the screen, but it's weaving in ends as you go. If you look for that method, you'll be able to find lots of videos on it on YouTube. And yeah, total game changer for my knitting. It has eliminated the for me, very boring process. I know some people find it a very meditative and enjoyable therapeutic process, but for me, I hate weaving in ends, I just do. So yeah, weaving in ends as you go, game changer. Okay, and that brings me to the very last segment of the podcast. I am going to share something more about Sri Lanka, the beautiful island on which my husband and I live at the moment. So it's a bit different today. I'm not going to talk about a place. I'm going to talk about my favourite subject, maybe even closer to my heart than knitting, which is food. I love food. Food in Sri Lanka is very good. It's very different to the food that we get in England, for example, and America. There are certain things that are typical to Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan and South Indian cuisine that I haven't seen anywhere else. There are obviously variations of similar things, but what I'm going to talk about today are Sri Lankan hoppers. Hoppers, I will put I'm going to switch to a picture. This is what a hopper looks like. So hoppers are a fermented rice flour pancake food. Rice flour is mixed with other ingredients, very simple ingredients, and put out to ferment. I would need to look up for how long, but it is fermented flour. You can smell that yeasty scent from it, from the flour, from the batter, and also from the hoppers when you buy them. They're a little bit sour, as fermented products are. So think of them as like a sourdough pancake, but made with rice flour. So they're gluten-free, naturally gluten-free, which is brilliant if you're avoiding gluten, like I do 90% of the time, for health reasons. They're cooked in a tiny little wok-like pan, so the pan is very small, with curved edges, and so that is what creates that round bowl-like shape of a hopper. And they're very difficult to describe because I would describe them as this. I would say they're like a crumpet pancake, but that would then mean I have to go into describing British crumpets. This is what crumpets look like. And a crumpet has holes in it that are made because the batter bubbles and it retains its holes, and then you can put usually butter on it, and the butter sinks down into the holes and just goes right through the pancake and soaks it up, not the pancake, sorry, the crumpet soaks it up, and it's just delicious. That's our favourite way to eat crumpets, although we like them with cheese as well. But anyway, that was a side point. So hoppers are very much, in my opinion, like crumpets in the springy consistency of the middle. So if you saw, the outside is crispy, but the middle is like a spongy consistency that is a bit like a crumpet. It has those holes, those like little holes that go all the way from the top to the base of the hopper, and that's perfect for the different varieties that you get. So you get egg hoppers and plain hoppers. They're the most popular ones. Plain hoppers are just the pancake. Egg hoppers are the pancake with an egg cracked into the middle and cooked into it. And that produces like a firmer and very protein-rich hopper, which is eaten, well, both types of hopper are eaten usually with curry. And other condiments, which we will talk about on another episode. And the other type of hopper which I really love is called a milk hopper. I think they're called kiri upper here, which is that translates milk hopper. And a milk hopper is made the same sort of way as a plain hopper, and then it has a sweet coconut milk production put onto it, and it's eaten with a bit of jaggery, which is coconut sugar, basically, which is really delicious. So milk hoppers personally are my favourite, but I do love hoppers as a genre of food. They're really, really nice. And as somebody who does generally tend to eat gluten-free, they also make a really good bread substitute if you want to eat them on another occasion, the non-traditional way. I have them sometimes with a bit of butter, or I've been known to eat them with cheese, because they're quite neutral in flavour and the texture of them is lovely. And you get, if you've ever eaten, if you eat gluten-free, you'll know that sometimes the texture of things, unless you buy it from a supermarket, you don't get that really crunchy texture. But the great thing about a hopper is it's crunchy on the outside, those thin sides, and then the inside, the middle part, is really spongy and chewy and springy. It's really delicious, so I really recommend them. They're typically eaten for either breakfast or dinner. You can go to something called hopper nights here at certain restaurants, and they just that they just do hoppers. They just turn them out constantly, and you can order, people often order 5, 10, 15 at a time. You get a huge amount of them for a table, and everyone just tucks in. You can eat them with a variety of curries, chicken curry, fish curry, beef curry, whatever you like, and they're a really good vehicle basically to get that food into you. And I really do love hoppers. They're the savoury ones are delicious and very neutral tasting, but also they've got that lovely sort of caramelised flavour from the Maillard reaction of the heat hitting that rice flour on the edges. And the sweet hoppers, the milk hoppers, are just delicious, and I would say they're probably like nothing you've ever had before in your life. So if you can eat hoppers, I would definitely try them. Okay, I think I've been talking for a long time today. I've felt pretty good today, really quite relaxed, so that might be why this is going to be a long video. But anyway, I hope you have a great week. I did just want to mention, if you like this content, please give this video a thumbs up. Please like and subscribe for future videos. And also there is a little bell icon on YouTube. If you can click that, you'll be able to be alerted whenever I release a new video. So thank you again very much for listening. If you got this far, I really do appreciate your support. Take care and have a great week. Bye.